used to talk to her every afternoon together. We would be talking on the phone, and she would never ask about how she felt, tell us about any complaints. All she would say is, tell me what you two did today. She was so engaged in loving her brother immensely and me, who became part of the family. So Ed said to me, you need to write my sister's book because she has more guts than I ever did. And I said, honey, that's not possible. You were 4 years behind enemy lines. And he said, wait till you discover her story. And that is what Tricia and I, after teaming up with this wonderful lady, made happen, which is this book. And so that is the beginning of the reason why this book is here, Taking Flight, the Nadine Ramsey Story. And it was a promise to Ed. It took us 3 years to make it happen with a great team, my son, Doug Ramsey, and also Shelley Cale, who was the editor of Ed's book, which was Lieutenant Ramsey's War. So the four of us kind of worked together for 3 years, and we have this product. And what I want to say is I'm so proud because this happened that the University of Kansas Press accepted unanimously to make our book. And I wanted that to happen because to me, it had a symbolism. This was a Kansas girl, goes back home, tells her story, and then she is able to make her story right from Kansas. And so I am so grateful to the University of Kansas Press. I'm happy they're sending you a book. You got to have one of this, Christine, in your library. And now, after 2 years, this came out 3 years ago, which was when we finished it, 2020. And now we're in 2023. They just, in November, republished it as a paperback, meaning to say we were able to go all the way selling everything that they had, which were 2,000 copies. And now we are preparing the documentary, which we will talk about a little later, which is very exciting for me because Vanilla Fire is on fire, getting the documentary going. So I would like to give now the table to Tricia to tell us about how she teamed up with me and how we came together to make this project happen. Tricia?
Thank you, Rocky. I'm so glad you're feeling better.
Thank you.
It's so nice to have you. So I met Rocky and your team in 2014. I was working on, they asked me to work on a mini series about Rocky's husband, Ed. And he's an incredible, as Rocky mentioned at the top, he was an incredible war hero. He was in the Philippines where he fought with the Philippine guerrillas behind enemy lines. His story is absolutely incredible. And there is a book about it, the Lieutenant Ramsey's War, as Rocky mentioned. So I was brought on board. My background is in screenwriting, to take that book and turn it into, the idea was a limited series. And I worked on the pilot script of that. And as I was reading about Ed's life, I was struck by the stories about Nadine, his sister. After their father's death in 1927, it was just them and their mother, Nell. And both Ed and Nadine had this incredible fighting spirit, this patriotism and this tenacity. And when you read Ed's story, you can see that that's where his inner strength came from when he was behind enemy lines. And I thought, this is clearly something that came from the family. This is something that must be a family trait shared by their mother, Nell, and by his sister, Nadine, his older sister, Nadine. And so the more that I read about Nadine's life, the more that I was so sure that not only was it her personality kind of carried over in some ways to Ed, but that, the remarkable gifts that she had were also an incredible story worth telling. And so I actually wrote her as a character into the documentary, or into the mini series that I was working on about Ed. because I thought she was such an integral part of his story. And I think that's probably why Raki thought of me when she was looking for an author to come alongside and help her with the book. And so I'm very, very honored that she approached me about it. And I was thrilled to get to dive in and learn more about Nadine's life. And Raki had done quite a bit of research already at the point that she asked me to step in. And then as we went along, we discovered there was actually quite a lot of research still to do. Um, because it was there were so many things about Nadine's life. Nadine passed away in 1997. And there was so much about her life that she sort of deliberately didn't leave behind. Some that had been lost, and some that she had also, she really wrestled in the last few years of her life with depression, as many World War II veterans did. And there were some things about her life that were kind of never really told in their entirety. She didn't have any children. She was married 3 times, but didn't have any children. She has a lot of nieces and nephews, Ed's children. There are family members surviving, obviously, but there was a lot that still needed uncovering. So as we dived into the research process, it was I don't know, we just started discovering more and more about Nadine's remarkable story. So I think we did research for about 6 months at least, just research. And then, as Raki mentioned, I think the writing of the book took about 2 years or more, as we were starting to put everything together, before we ended up at the University Press of Kansas. So,
So I think that you would like to read a passage, and I would like to read a passage from the book. And I
sure.
thought that I would pick the passage to me that is fascinating is the passage where she asks her brother, because her dream was to have her own plane. And many times when they ask in games, who's the only woman who owned her own P-38? Well, that's Nadine Ramsey.
Mm-hmm.
And many people didn't know that, but they found that out because she became the cover of Life magazine. That was the reason they put her there. P-38 owner, not just flying the plane. So I would like to read this passage in page 154, chapter 2, her own P-38. Beginning in the spring of 1945, surplus warplanes were ferried to sales centers across the country, some of them by former WASPs. The aircraft ran the gamut from war-weary and damaged to those with fewer than 100 flying hours. In early February 1946, by the way, that's when I was born, February 10, I'm turning 77, Nadine learned that nearly 500 P-38 Lightnings were for sale at Storage Depot number 41 of the War Assets Administration, formerly the Kingman Army Airfield in Kingman, Arizona. There, thousands of war surplus and decommissioned aircraft were lined up in rows across 4,000 acres of desert, waiting to be turned into scrap metal. The Lightnings, which each cost $115,000 to make, more than $1.6 million in 2020 dollars, were going for $1,250 per plane, less than $18,000 in 2020 dollars. A P-38 at that price was a steal, but on her instructor's salary, Nadine didn't even have that much money readily available. She knew her brother would understand her reason for buying a P-38, so she called Ed and asked for a loan. When he heard what she wanted, he laughed and said, yes. On Valentine's Day, Nadine went to Kingman and found the plane of her dreams. She bought it on the spot, making her P-38 one of only 10 planes that were ultimately purchased in Kingman. She flew it back to Long Beach the same day. Sure enough, Nadine's purchase made the news. On February 15, the Los Angeles Times printed a 2-column article headline, "Woman Goes Shopping, Flies Home with P-38." noting that while most women are still waiting for their post-war dreams of nylons, clothing, and household articles to materialize, Nadine Ramsey of 5300 Hanbury Street, Long Beach, had hers all wrapped up yesterday. Only it wasn't a feminine item. Nadine, the reporter wrote, had stepped figuratively and actually into the stratosphere when she picked off a bargain at such a saving that womankind everywhere can envy her without reserve. She not only scored a neat victory over all bargain hunter competitors, but so far as is known, she became the first female civilian in the world to own outright one of the world's fastest airplanes. And Tricia has laid out a collage of photographs where you will see her P-38. Do you want to read yours, Tricia? Yeah.
Sure. I will get to my my passage here in a few minutes. I do want to pull up this photograph. Let me see if I can screen share.
Okay.
So you can see Nadine and her plane. One moment. Let me see if I can screen share here. I apologize. One moment.
Well, better you than me, because I don't know any technology. It's good, it's working.
Okay, let me see if I can screen share here. Okay, so let's say share.
Mm-hmm.
And then here you go.
Oh,
Can you all
wow.
see that? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So the portion that Raki just read about Nadine's P-38, which is here on the right-hand side of the screen, is one of Nadine's biggest accomplishments, I think, and probably the thing, as Raki mentioned, for which she is most notable on paper as being probably the only woman to ever own her own P-38. The photograph here on the right was taken by Peter Stackpole of Life magazine, and it's her with the airplane. Keep in mind, for those not familiar with military aircraft, which I was not before writing this book, but this is a twin engine pursuit aircraft. So it was one of the most critical fighter aircraft that was used during World War II. And the P-38 was notoriously difficult to handle. And so actually only 26 women flew this plane during the war, were qualified to fly this plane during the war. But Nadine loved a challenge. And this was one of her favorite planes to fly. And so of all the planes that she probably could have bought, and it was very, very fast also. The paper at the time said it was one of the fastest in the world. And that's true, perhaps only second to the P-51. And so, yeah, this is quite an ambitious purchase for somebody like Nadine at the time. And it is no wonder that it made the news. And we have quite a few other photographs in the book as well of Nadine and her P-38, which she called Lucky. And after the war, she flew it in air races and in air shows and things like that. It was an expensive plane to maintain, so she only flew it for a few years. She did end up having a very close call in this aircraft during actually, so she was signed up to fly in the Bendix Air Race, which is a very famous cross-country speed race that resumed. It was on hold during the war, and then it resumed after the war. And Nadine was one of only two women to sign up to fly in 1946 in the Bendix Air Race. And she was, going to fly her P-38, but she was actually sabotaged on the night before the race. Her tires were slashed, and she was not able to fly in that race. And actually, her plane was not the only one that was sabotaged. But it certainly was a big disappointment that she wasn't able to fly in that race. And after it was repaired, when she was taking it up for a test flight, she ended up having a close call in the plane where her basically the canopy came loose and knocked off her headphones, gave her a concussion at that moment. And then also the nose dipped down. This is as she was taking off, and the propellers scraped the runway. You can see how big they are. And they were bent back into like a fish hook shape. There are only 6 propeller blades, and 5 of them were bent back into fishhook shapes after scraping the runway. And Nadine was actually able to land the plane even under those conditions, concussed and with propellers that were bent into that shape. Truly a remarkable feat, and only a very savvy and cool-headed pilot could have done something like that. So there was an article about that as well. Lots of adventures that we were able to uncover and share about in the book. This photograph on the left here, if you're all able to continue seeing my screen here, is Nadine and her mother Nell. Nadine's here on the left, her mother Nell, and then her brother Ed, Racky's husband, right after he came home from the Philippines. As I mentioned, he was behind enemy lines and fighting with the Philippine guerrillas during the war. And this was when he finally came home. He was missing in action for 3 years, and he finally came home in 1945. And this was a photograph taken by the newspaper when they were reunited at Nell's home in Kansas. So I have several other photographs as well. If we want to, and then here's a picture of Nadine in a P-51. We're kind of going back in time here a little bit, but this is another pursuit aircraft that Nadine was qualified to fly and flew during the war. This would have been probably at pursuit school. Flying fighter aircraft was very specialized. As Christine mentioned at the top, only 303 women flew military aircraft at all during the war domestically. And a very few, I believe the number, I have the number somewhere here, but I believe it was about 134 were qualified to fly pursuit. No, wait, a smaller number than that. I have the number here, but
Here.
303 ferried military aircraft, 134, that's correct, flew pursuits. So a very small number flew pursuit aircraft. And this would have been Nadine learning to fly a P-51 here, probably at pursuit school in 1944. Again, a very fast plane. This is a single engine fighter plane. I can go back a little bit farther. Actually, let me go back. There's so much about Nadine's life that for me are sort of the highlights of the book. I suppose I'm stalling a little bit because I could choose many different excerpts to read. But I wanted to go back a little bit to talk about Nadine's life in Kansas when she was learning to fly. You can see here, this would have been in 1926, this photograph here on the left, when she learned to fly for the first time. This would have been the first time she soloed in this little aircraft. And we believe it was 1926-ish that she received her pilot's license. No, sorry, 1936 that she received her commercial pilot's license, the first woman in Kansas to do that. This photograph here on the lower right was taken on the day that Nadine flew the airmail, which was during National Airmail Week in 1938. She flew a very, very short route from Wichita, Kansas to Wellington, Kansas, to deliver a bag of mail. During National Airmail Week in 1938, there was a lot of extra mail that needed to be delivered. So many pilots were recruited to fly the airmail simply for that week. And so Nadine flew the airmail in that week, and she was not the only woman to do so. There were not many women flyers at the time, and not many that also flew the airmail, but at least 2 of Nadine's fellow WASP also flew the airmail the same day that she did. But she would have been among the first to fly the airmail there. And you can see the bag of mail here at her feet. She was presented with flowers, and her mother Nell is standing there beside her, by officials from the city of Wichita and Wellington with the airmail. And then this photograph here at the top would have been Nadine, probably in California. She moved to Southern California in 1939, being frustrated and having hit a glass ceiling in Wichita at the time. And so she actually started stunt flying in Southern California in 1939, and also selling aircraft, doing demonstration flying and things like that before the war. And she became friends with a lot of Hollywood folks at the time, and kind of was flying high. And then, excuse me, and then in 1940, Nadine was demonstrating an airplane to a potential buyer, a woman named Gertrude Snow, in Southern California here, east of Los Angeles. That's where Rocky and I both live here. And she was flying, and the woman that she was demonstrating the airplane to asked her to buzz the house, her own house, where her husband was working out in the yard. And her husband had no idea that she was flying that day. And so they were trying to surprise him. And so Nadine obligingly flew low, swooped down low, and buzzed the house. And then the client asked her to go around again and buzz the house again. And when Nadine came around for a second time to buzz the house, a downdraft caught the plane and basically drove it into the branches of a very tall oak tree. And there was a horrible crash. Nadine and the woman, the nose of the plane was crushed, and then it fell to the ground. Both of their legs were crushed in the crash. And actually, Gertrude Snow's husband raced to the wreckage and cut the ignition in the wreck, and otherwise the plane would have caught fire and they both surely would have burned to death. But he had the presence of mind to do that. He was a retired colonel himself. And they rushed both Nadine and her passenger to local hospitals, and Nadine nearly lost her leg. It was absolutely crushed by that crash. And so this is her recuperating in 1940. She insisted that if she didn't get to keep her leg, then she wouldn't be able to fly again. And if she wasn't able to fly again, she said she didn't want to live. And
Mhm.
finally, one of her friends who claimed to speak for the family refused to let the doctors amputate. And fortunately, Nadine was able to recover from that crash.
Mhm.
With Ed's help. Ed at the time was in law school in Oklahoma, I believe. And he absolutely walked out of his classes and drove to California and moved in with Nadine to take care of her. Rocky, feel free to jump in if I'm missing anything
I
here.
know. Go ahead. You're doing wonderfully.
Wonderful. To me, this story of Nadine's recovery after her crash in 1940 is one of the most remarkable things about her, and really speaks to the fighting spirit that she and Ed shared, and their mother Nell. Ed and Nadine lost their father to suicide in 1927, and um, it was, he was somebody that struggled with alcoholism, he struggled with depression, and the two of them were sort of this tight little unit and team that were determined to fight through things no matter how hard things got. And this this decision that Ed made to help Nadine recover from her crash, and Nadine's determination to do that in spite of everything, really kind of tells you everything you need to know about them as a family. And I just think it's really moving. Nadine was able to fly again within 6 months of this crash, which is really just remarkable.
Mhm.
Uh, and then when the United States entered the war, um, there was almost immediately a need for more pilots. So, not just male pilots, there was a desperate need for that as well. And there had been some training in colleges around the country to train male pilots. And there also had been a move to train women pilots to fly because the Army kind of anticipated needing as many extra pilots as they could get. So Nadine was already a pilot at that point. But there was immediately a move by the Army to try to figure out a way to utilize women pilots. They didn't want to send them into combat, but they knew that they could help. And one of the primary things they needed women to do was move military aircraft from place to place domestically during the war. So mostly from plants where aircraft were being manufactured to training bases, and then also to embarkation points where they could be sent to the theaters of war. Um, it was a very complicated story. There are actually quite a few books about the forming of the Women Air Force Service Pilots as an organization. and it's very complicated. The organization itself was sort of started by two different women in two different ways. Both Nancy Harkness Love and Jacqueline Cochran had this idea that women pilots could do this job that the Army desperately needed them to do. And they kind of went about starting programs in different ways. So Nancy Harkness Love started a program for very well qualified women pilots to quickly as they could train on military aircraft and start ferrying right away. And then Jacqueline Cochran had this idea to train women from basically not being pilots or having very little experience, start training them specifically to fly military aircraft from the get-go. And then that program ended up being the one that was expanded. There were not many women flyers at the time, so there were not many that met qualifications to like quickly check out on military aircraft. A lot of the women needed to be trained from scratch. And so that was when the Women Air Force Service Pilots program kind of became what it was, which was a training program based at Avenger Field in Sweetwater, Texas, that was systematically training women specifically to fly military aircraft to do these jobs that needed to be done stateside. Now, Nadine was already very qualified, so she was accepted early into the program. She didn't need as much training as a lot of the other women did. And that's why she was able to then move on to fly pursuit aircraft, fly the P-38. Not all the women were eventually utilized to ferry aircraft. Ferrying aircraft also required a level of skill and discipline that a lot of the women never achieved. So that's why when you see or read stories about the Women Air Force Service pilots, there were about 1,100 women. I want to say the number was 1,102 women that were women Air Force Service pilots. They were members of the WASP organization. But not all of those women ferried military aircraft. Only 303 of them ferried military aircraft. And then, as we mentioned, only 134 of them ferried pursuit aircraft. And then, as we mentioned, only 26 of them flew the P-38. So because Nadine had started when she was so much younger, she sort of had a leg up on some of the other women that came through the program. So this is her here on the left in her military, her Santiago blues, which was the uniform that eventually they adopted, the WASP adopted. You can see her wings here. This photograph here on the right is a WASP graduation at Sweetwater, Texas, at Avenger Field, where you can see the women marching in formation. And then Nadine was first stationed at Dallas, but eventually was stationed at Long Beach Army Airfield, which is where she was stationed for pretty much all of 1944. I think she was transferred there in May of 1944. And at the time, the women who were ferrying pursuit aircraft were responsible for 3/5 of all the pursuit aircraft that were being moved around in the country. So they were doing a critically important job for the war at that time. If you know anything about the war, and then I have the photo here of Nadine in her P-50 in the P-51 in training. If you know anything about the war, by the end of 1944, things were going much better, and more male pilots were surviving their missions, and there was a lot of success that was happening abroad. And so male pilots in the United States, the Army stopped training as many new male pilots. There wasn't such an urgent need to train as many new male pilots. And so male pilots who were doing ferrying jobs alongside the Women Air Force Service pilots started to worry that they would be sent overseas. So they started to lobby basically to disband the WASP program because they would rather stay stateside. And there were a variety of political reasons that, ultimately the Army agreed to disband the WASP program, but they did. They caved to a variety of these kind of political pressures, and as as happened to women who were serving on a number of fronts, They were kind of, when it became obvious that there wasn't a great need for them anymore, they were sort of sent back to domestic life very unceremoniously. The WASP had always expected that they would be militarized. They were always told that they would be militarized, and they were not. Um, they were not officially militarized at all. They were very unceremoniously disbanded in 1944 in December. Um, at that time, as I mentioned, they were doing critically important work, but the Army didn't care. They just thought it was kind of a bad look to have women pilots continuing to do the jobs that male pilots could do. And so they sent them all home. Um, it was really tragic. It's one of the things that makes my blood boil every time I think about it. And there have been, as I mentioned, I would be happy to recommend other reading on the WASPs and their story. But many of the women who were flying were not able to continue flying after that. There was no access for them to continue flying military aircraft or any other kind. Commercial airlines were not ready for women pilots. They wouldn't be ready for women pilots for 30 years. And there was almost nothing, that they could do unless, some women opened up aircraft sales, and they would sales companies, and they would sell aircraft. Some women became, flying instructors privately and things like that. But a lot of women were not able to fly again really in a meaningful way, and it was heartbreaking for them. It's one thing that you read across the board when you hear their stories. Nadine was very lucky. She, being such a highly qualified pursuit pilot, was able to actually stay on at Long Beach Army Airfield after the war, and she instructed male pilots in flying pursuit aircraft through 1945, through the end of the war, and then on after that as well. She was, we believe, the only woman to instruct male pilots on flying pursuit aircraft. And, at the time, she was not married, she was childless, she was in her 30s. And so she was able to take advantage of sort of some of the experience that she had and the social situation she was in. And so she was able to continue flying. And then she was lucky enough to be able to purchase her P-38 and continue flying then too. And obviously, again, incredibly lucky that her brother survived the war, and a lot of happy times around this time in the family's life. And then, as time passed, um, after this heartbreaking experience, when the women were not militarized and not recognized for their contributions to the war effort, eventually they started to lobby and advocate for themselves. The former WASPs got together, they formed clubs and groups, they got an organization started, they started issuing a newsletter as the years passed, and they had reunions. And then they also started trying to right this wrong. They started advocating for themselves in Congress. And in the 1970s, eventually they were able to provide basically enough evidence that they had flown, essentially in the military, that they should be officially recognized as being a part of the military. They should be recognized as veterans. Now, this was something they had always known. And again, they had always been promised and felt. 38 WASPs died doing the job during the war, and they were not able to they were not given military funerals. Their parents were not allowed to drape an American flag on their caskets. They were not allowed to display gold service stars. And there was not justice for those 38 women, and there were not veterans benefits for the other surviving WASP. And so by the 1970s, they were very vocal about this, and they had gathered enough evidence and gone back to Congress, and things were changing for women all over the country. And so there was more public sentiment on their side. And they were, in 1944, everyone was shocked that the women wanted to be militarized. And by 1977, everyone was shocked that the women had not been militarized. And so they were finally able to basically be recognized as veterans, and they had to submit their war records and all of the things, all the evidence. But one by one, they did that, and they were recognized as being veterans and were eligible for veterans benefits and things like that. So that was in 1977. And it wasn't complete justice. Obviously, many had passed on by then, but it was a start. By that time in her life, Nadine, old injuries from her 1940 crash had caught up with her, and she was not in good health. And she, even though, despite not, I
Your baby.
apologize if you can hear my toddler in the next room.
Your baby.
I know. Anyway, but she was, despite not being, old or anything, she was not in great health, even in the 1970s. And she was eventually grounded and told she was not able to fly anymore, which plunged her into a deep depression, because flying was her life. And so it was kind of a small comfort, I think, for her, and even for a lot of the other WASPs. It was just so late. It was such late recognition. But it was something. So that was in 1977. Eventually, you can see here on the right, in 2009, the Women Air Force Service pilots were finally awarded the Congressional Gold Medal. And this photo here, Raquel, you'll have to share with us exactly when it would have been.
Yes. Well, that
Looks
was
like it's the
Christmas.
90s to me.
Yes, we visited Nadine every weekend. Every Saturday, we would drive to Long Beach. This is the Marlora Manor. And she was staying there, and we would pick her up, and she loved hamburgers. So we would go to a specialty hamburger place every Saturday. And there is Ed and me, and the joy that she has on her face, and the joy we had of seeing her. And so that was like a ritual every weekend. First, talking to her every day at 4:00 in the afternoon. She waits for my call. And then comes the weekend. We drive to Long Beach, go there to the Marlora, and then take her out to have hamburgers, specialty hamburgers. She liked all kinds of specialty. This place was a specialty hamburger place. And so those are the memories that we have. And it was just so wonderful. And she was happy at that time, in spite of the pain, because she was always in pain with her back. And that is also synonymous to people like our son, Douglas, who never complains about anything. She has that character. Instead of, when you pick up the phone, instead of saying, oh my God, my back is aching, that's a normal, relationship or communication of a person. I didn't feel so well today. She never, the first thing she would say, what did you do today? And all she wanted was to know about us. That's love. And I think that this book is really filled with love. Pain, but love, which conquers all. And that's what I found with both of them. And I am so proud to be a Ramsey of this two, brother and sister, that made history, because both of them have congressional gold medals. I'm so proud to say that in my mini museum, I have two congressional gold medals. In fact, one for Nadine came before Ed. Ed was given by the Philippine Scouts, and I received it in 2018. So it is an incredible, incredible journey that we have. And to tell this story, thank you so much, Tricia. That was a wonderful story of Nadine. You are really my hero, my partner in making Nadine's story be known by everybody. And that's what my mission is. Carry Ed's legacy, and now carry Nadine, because that's what he wanted me to do. Write her story, because she is actually braver than me, which I couldn't believe.
Yeah, and so if you want, Rack, you can go ahead and tell everyone about the documentary that we have coming out.
Yes. So that
let
is
me
the
see if I
next.
can pull up the poster here.
Okay, pull the poster. So when Ed passed away, Vanilla Fire came to me and they said, we want to tell Ed's story. And so we worked on Never Surrender, the Ed Ramsey Story, which actually premiered in 2016, November 2016. And the documentary was shortlisted with the Oscars, and we lost to O.J. Simpson. I will not comment on that. And then now Vanilla Fire was ready to make Taking Flight, the Nadine Ramsey story. With Never Surrender, we had Josh Brolin as the narrator, and now we have Jane Seymour. And actually, I was supposed to have lunch with Jane Seymour, Tricia, and I in Malibu, and that was exactly when COVID hit. And so she was caught in England, and we were here, couldn't get together. And so that is where we are, picking up Taking Flight. This is a picture of the team, and that's Stephen Barber on the left, and that's Matt Housley, the director. He's the producer, and then the author, the writer of the screenplay, and that is Jay Miracle. And he's a two-time Academy Award and winner of an Emmy for documentary. So we are in very good hands on Taking Flight, the Nadine Ramsey story. And that is our project this entire year. We're already in post-production, because we finished doing all the interviews of all of the characters that will be coming into the film. And it was interesting for me because my background is teaching, right? And I was teaching English at the Beverly Hills Unified School District. Of course, I was in the profession for 50 years. But to become an archivist, a historian, an executive producer, this is a whole new me. And so here I am being interviewed by them. And Tricia was also interviewed. And so you will see all of us when hopefully we invite all of you to the premiere in 2014. And that's what we are looking at. So now I go back to any questions that you may have, now that we have talked about the documentary. Yes, Patty is waving her hand. She has a question.
Well, I was going to ask the two of you, when you have two writers on a project like this, I have the book, and I wonder, how did you divide the writing tasks? Who did you like? There's some italicized portions at the beginning of chapters that are sort of scenes, and did one of you take all of those, or how did you divide the tasks?
Well, so Raki had done a good chunk of the research and obviously had all of the archival photographs, and a lot of the original material that was needed for the book. So she was kind of doing work at the outlining and structuring phase. So when she brought me onto the project, a lot of that work had already been done in terms of how the book was going to be structured. And then as we were working together, I was primarily doing the writing, and then I would send pages and chapters and things like that to Raki and to our editor, Shelley Kale, who did a lot to contribute as well. And so they would send, notes and things back to me. So you can kind of, I guess I was in the driver's seat and Raki was navigating.
Okay.
There was a question I saw here by Tiffany asking about military honors for the women. This is very interesting because one of the last people that we interviewed is Erin Miller. And she, together with Tricia, were interviewed at the same time. And she finally got her grandmother to be receiving the honors of being buried in Arlington. So you got to understand this. First of all, they were not veterans, so they were not given any honors whatsoever, okay? Not even paid for their funerals. This was really what outraged Ed. So in many ways, Ed was always fighting for the underdog. He fought for the Filipinos to get the rights when he was with the cavalry in World War II. And now he sees his sister going through the same pain. And now finally, one after another came the honors. And so they got the Congressional Gold Medal for the WASP as a body. And then now Erin Miller's grandmother was buried in Arlington. And so that to me is the culmination, and you will see all of that in the documentary, which I
Yeah.
think is just an incredible journey for the WASPs to feel that they are finally recognized.
Yeah, the women were fighting for their right to be interned at Arlington until 2015. It wasn't until then that they were allowed to be interned at Arlington,
Any
which
other?
is
Yeah, go ahead.
infuriating, but yeah.
Yeah. Are there any other questions from anybody?
So where is Nadine buried? And doesn't she have some awards where she's buried?
Great question. Nadine requested to have her to be cremated, and her ashes were scattered at sea over Long Beach Harbor. So she was not buried. Ed is buried at Arlington, and then their mother Nell is buried here in the LA area.
But Nadine wanted that she would be in the waters of Long Beach, because that's where she did not only train, but then go to fly and then sell airplanes. Her life from Kansas went to California. And so this is really a beautiful story of hers. And that's how she wanted it to be.
Yeah, it was Ed that scattered her ashes at
Long Beach.
So where will the documentary be shown?
Okay, I can tell you exactly where Never Surrendered premiered, and that is the Simon Wiesenthal Center Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles. That's where Rabbi Cooper, I taught at the Yeshiva University High Schools of Los Angeles. And so I got to know Rabbi Cooper, the associate dean. And so he gave us the venue for Never Surrender. And so he says to me, Raquel, you have the venue now for taking flight, the Nadine Ramsey Story. So that's where we're going to have it. And I am really looking at November for the Veterans Again of 2024. That would be a perfect time because, again, there's a lot that comes along with production, which again is very, very exciting, but so new to me because I learned so much from so many people. Yeah. Did you guys learn to fly? Well, I can be in a plane, but I will not fly the plane.
Yeah, it's something I've actually always wanted to do, but I have not learned yet.
So
I learned a lot about flying as I was writing the book, and it just impressed me more with the work that these women did, the more that I learned about, and especially back then, the kind of planes that they were flying were not the kind of aircraft we think of today. No navigational computers, nothing like that. It required a crazy amount of courage, I think. So
I would like to mention that Lieutenant General Jeannie Leavitt, who wrote the foreword to our book, I asked her to write the foreword because she was the first F-15 pilot. And I said to her, would you honor me? She said, I would be delighted. She said, do you know that when you received the Congressional Gold Medal, I was at the back of the room. I didn't know who she was, but then I researched about her and I said, maybe she will accept to do the writing of the foreword. And she said, it was the most beautiful thing. And what an honor for you to ask me that, because she said, as I was at the back of the room, I was watching the WASP receiving what made it possible for women like me to become F-15 pilots. And so that to me had such a big, big impact. And I know that Nadine must be smiling above that she's able to give this kind of message to young girls. You can do it once you set yourself. And that is Ed's policy on never surrender. You just aim high. And she said that was her words in her forward. She said, aim high. That was what Lieutenant General Jeannie Leavitt, and she's in charge of the United States Air Force area.
So wasn't there something about Nadine at the Air and Space Museum?
Yes. All right, this is a recent honor. They have just inscribed her name on the Wall of Honor of the Smithsonian, and that is the National Air and Space Museum. I am just so thrilled and honored that finally Nadine is getting her honors, well deserved. She also has a plaque, which they installed at the Mount Soledad Memorial in La Jolla, California. So those are new things that we are adding as those things are coming in to be included in the documentary.
Mhm.
Well, what a fabulous story.
Thank
Thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Thank you.
What a wonderful lady, and your family, and how her upbringing and her enthusiasm and her never ever give up and her grit and determination allowed
Exactly.
her to do that, because
Mhm.
just as Tricia said, she had to learn an awful lot about how to fly these planes without all of the technology that pilots have nowadays. So
Yeah.
she really was a true pilot, and she probably knew how to repair and take care of her plane as well,
Mhm.
Hmm.
probably.
Yeah.
She's
I
a
mean,
real
she,
pioneer. Mhm.
yes, she's a very savvy, very smart pilot. Again, she was an instructor for many years. And so I think that's the other thing, is that being a teacher is almost a separate skill in some ways than being a pilot. And
True.
she was excellent at that as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it's just a fabulous story. So the library will look forward to having a book in our collection, and thanks very much to the University of Kansas for making that possible for the library. And I want to thank you so much, Raquel Ramsey, for reaching out to the library to have the Nadine Ramsey story. It's part of our Authors and Journey series. And thank you so much, Tricia, for presenting and talking today. And I appreciate your talking about the research and her wonderful life. It's just quite a story, quite an honor, and it really put women in the forefront.
Yes.
World War
thank
II,
you. Yes.
big part of it. So
And
are
thank
there
you so
any
much.
other questions before we close? I don't think so. Everybody's saying thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. And I
Thank
think
you all.
we've all learned so much. So thank you again, Raquel and Tricia. I know everybody enjoyed this afternoon's program.
Well, thank you, Christine.
And today's program was recorded for YouTube Pasadena Library, and it will be on Pasadena Library's YouTube very soon. And we'll have the book in soon. So someone else is saying that her grandniece is in the Air Force and flying F-18s, military.
Wow.
Incredible.
Incredible.
Yeah, just incredible.
Well, Christine, I want to congratulate you on your program, because this is the way to tell a story. You make this happen through your author series, this program. And this is the best way for us to be able to carry the legacy of such an incredible woman, Nadine Ramsey. And so I want to thank you, Christine. You are now part of the Ramsey clan family. And so thank you so much for having invited us. It was an honor, and I am so looking forward to more of your programs, because you do such a great job carrying those.
Thank you very, very much. For all of you that are on the program today, you can go to the Pasadena Public Library's website. You can go to our off-the-shelf bi-monthly calendar, and we have lots of programs called Authors and Their Journeys. And we're also now starting the month of February, and we're having a lot of authors talk about their books for the Black History Month. So I hope you'll join us and look forward to our other programs. We do have a huge program in March, One City, One Story. It is our 21st year. We are featuring the book by Nadia Hashimi, Sparks Like Stars. She is an immigrant through her parents to the United States, but she's grown up in the United States, and her parents and family came from Afghanistan. She is currently a doctor in Washington, D.C., as well as her husband is, and she's written several fictional books. They're really called historical fiction about Afghanistan. And of course, right now she is a big proponent for women in Afghanistan, and you know the unfortunate events that have taken place there. So she
Yes.
will be here talking in Pasadena on Friday, March the 24th at 7 o'clock at Pasadena Presbyterian Church on Colorado Boulevard. If any of you are interested in coming, it's a free event, and you can go to our off the shelf and get more information about the book. And we will have lots and lots of books in the library for you to check out. And if you come to different events, you can also receive a free book. So thank you very much for considering that. And I just want to thank you again, Raquel and Tricia, for a fabulous program. And it was a wonderful, wonderful afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Feel the
Good
same
night,
way.
everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank
Bye-bye.
you to everybody who attended. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.